it's a reflection of the urgency of the situation, really. I mean, the people of Canada are feeling vulnerable, bruised, and so their prime minister has invited their head of state to simply shall we say, underline the sovereignty of the nation, and that's what he's going to do.
Now, the King will head to Canada next week to meet the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. It will be the first time a British monarch has delivered a so-called speech from the throne, that is, of course, the opening of the Canadian Parliament, since 1977. Now let's speak to Robert Hardman, the journalist and author of Charles III, The New King, New Court, The Inside Story. Robert, welcome to the show.
Morning, Ed.
This is a trip fraught with some diplomatic difficulties. I mean, the King going to visit the country where his head of state normally wouldn't attract too much attention, but obviously given Donald Trump's attentions, it will.
It certainly will. I mean, I'm struggling to remember the last time a royal trip to Canada attracted quite so much eager anticipation, and no doubt will attract a great deal of attention when he's there. But this is it's a reflection of the urgency of the situation, really. I mean, the people of Canada are feeling vulnerable, bruised, and so their prime minister has invited their head of state to simply shall we say, underline the sovereignty of the nation, and that's what he's going to do.
I mean, you must have a sense of how royal insiders are viewing this trip. I mean, how are they handling it? Because obviously in potentially a few months' time, the King will host Donald Trump. Donald Trump does love the royal family. I was told a brilliant story this week that when they were all in France for the opening of Notre Dame, the Versailles had to call the British embassy to get Donald Trump back because he was having such a good time with Prince William. So navigating this is very difficult.
Yes, I mean it's the age-old conundrum of what's called the divisibility of the crown, which was sort of enshrined in law really after the late Queen became Queen, and the Royal Titles Bill established that she was Queen of Canada, Queen of Australia, that these were, if you like, all independent queenships, which is fine, but every now and then you're going to have an issue where that monarch is, should we say, pulled in two directions. And it's really down to a combination of sort of skilled advisors and the wisdom and experience of the monarch. And what we have to remember in this is that, I mean, the King has been, he's been on the international stage for way longer than any of the other players on the international stage today. I mean, this is someone whose first visit to the White House was in the days of Richard Nixon. He spent an hour in the Oval Office then, having lessons in leadership from him. So, he knows what's going on. We have to remember that he is ultimately he acts on the advice of his prime ministers wherever they are. But I think Mark Carney will be wise to the situation. I mean, he's not going to put sort of bellicose words in the King's mouth.
There's a lot to think about here, because I suspect King Charles quite enjoys these slightly frisky visits. I mean, there'll be lots of signals with ties and cufflinks and that kind of thing, and the odd remark.
Well, there have been lots of signals already for those who care to look for them. I mean, I know some people in Canada have said, why hasn't the King spoken out? But I mean, we have to remember that's just not what monarchs do. I mean, think back to 1983, the late Queen, the US didn't just make rude remarks. The US invaded one of her realms without asking her, Grenada. She didn't actually say anything about that. She left the megaphone diplomacy to the politicians. So we have been there before. But I mean, if you do look at what's been going on in recent weeks, just since should we say Canadian sovereignty has suddenly become this sort of bizarre issue. Suddenly you have the King. He's welcomed two Canadian prime ministers in the space of a month. You've had Canadian Senate round to Buckingham Palace. There's Canadian Black Rod. When he was asked to plant a tree in the Palace Garden the other day, what did he choose? He chose to plant a maple. He was round at Canada House last week. The signals are there. Royals tend to do show, not tell. So look at the show. Don't wait for the tell.
And just very quickly, I mean, where does this put the King in relation to his relationship with Canadians? Because I imagine the sort of default position of most Canadians is it's slightly odd to have, to all intents and purposes, a British King as their monarch. Is this any evidence it's increased the popularity of the monarchy, the fact that Charles is there?
Certainly, everyone seems to be very keen that he's coming, and he'll be made very welcome. I mean, again, with all things royal, you need to take a longer view, really. And I mean, I look back to the 60s. Canada was very much the problem realm back then. I mean, the Queen's visit to Canada in 1964 was so fraught with violence that we almost had a very serious constitutional issue, because Alec Douglas-Home, then British Prime Minister, was seriously thinking of advising her not to go, which would have put her directly at odds with her Canadian Prime Minister had she decided not to go, because there was so much. There were demonstrations, particularly in Quebec. It was all about French-speaking separatists, and there were. I mean, there was a story in the Telegraph at the time about Cuban terrorists lying in wait in the woods with assassins. It was a very difficult time for the monarchy back in the 60s. And then suddenly you had the Watergate scandal in America, and everyone in Canada thought, oh, actually, you know what? I think we quite like having this monarchy. And it hasn't really been an issue since then, whereas it has been in other parts of the world. You had a referendum in Australia. You've had, the issue has resurfaced in the Caribbean. So, at any given time, there are bound to be parts of the all of the 15 realms where some people say, well, hang on, why don't we have our own homegrown head of state? And that's a perfectly legitimate debate, but
totally,
that's one for the politicians, not for the monarchy.
It is a legitimate debate, Robert Hardman, but